Right, welcome to Money Watch Weekly. My name is Yola Chomba, your host. Now, the much anticipated budget presentation in the New Dawn government by the UPND is this Friday, the 29th of October. Now, in as much as the Minister of Finance, Dr. Honorable Stumbeko Musokotwane, did mention that he had adopted a budget that was being prepared by the PF regime, he would tweak it a little bit, him and his team, and then also present that over to us. Now, our show today looks at expectations of this budget. Of course, key areas that to tackle, and in comparison with previous budgets, even if they were in the old regime, the fact is I want to see how the UPND government will try and show us their alignment towards the UPND manifesto. And to help us do that, of course, we have Munyumba Mtwale, an economist and financial markets advisor with us. Good and welcome to Money Watch, Munyumba.
Good evening, Well.
All right, now, Munyumba, I'll just start with the basics. 2021 budget, when it was being presented last year by Dr. Walyangandu, the central macro objectives were 1.8 GDP, obviously coming off the back of COVID. They had to change that. We also had an inflation rate range of 6 to 8%, reduced fiscal deficit, to 9.3%, achieved domestic revenue collection of not less than 18%, were some of the macroeconomic objectives. How do you see those turning out this time around?
Well, I think for this budget, they are trying to look at becoming a bit more frugal and also trying to stick to their word. The biggest problem, I think, over the last 5 years is whatever's been presented in the budget has been abrogated for the next year. We've basically spent a day promising and then 12 months going the other direction and claiming it was environmental factors that changed everything. So I think this time we actually have to try and stick to whatever budget is presented. But it's going to be looked at very stringently because the rest of the world, including those of us who are in the bond market specifically, are going to be looking very carefully as to what the government's outlook on their spending plan is and what their outlook on business is. So how's it going to turn out? We will see a lot more constrained spending. We will see a lot more constraint. We're probably going to see a lot more constraint in that. People like Dr. Musokotwane have been known for constrained spending, and I think that's what the UPND are trying to go into, spending control and basically directing money to the right places. There are some themes that will follow this.
Interesting. Now, if you go back historically, the past up to 10 years, we've always had budget overruns. Now, for reasons best known to government, sometimes it's beyond their control, and then they'll take a bill to Parliament to increase that, to give a medium-term budget. Do you see that happening this time around in the UPND government?
Part of the main thing, where President Hichilema has found himself is where President Mwanawasa found himself in 2001. And the first thing he has to try and deliver is budget surplus. In other words, the government has to act like a home. You cannot spend more than you make. That's what everyone else, that's what normal people do. When you have your money, you tend to spend within it. Governments, on the other hand, because they have the ability to print money and borrow at alarming rates with no one stopping them, tend to have this thing of just never stopping themselves. So one of the things we have to show is constraint, because if we want things like an IMF package, what you have to understand is the IMF puts about 75% on. They put about 75% of budget debt. They put that directly on deficits. So if you don't control your deficits, they don't see you controlling your debt. So in order to be able to do that, you actually have to be able to show that you can control your deficit. So they're going to have to show a plan to a balanced budget. And President Hichilema did promise this. Did not really promise it, but he was giving hints of a balanced budget. I remember there was a video clip, a famous one he put around on Facebook to show that. Now, I think where the budget overruns become a problem, Yoela, is this is the stringent thing. It causes debt. This is the biggest cause of debt. The fact that we tend to just spend more than we make, and we decided that this government's not going to run on taxes. It's going to run on borrowing. So over the last decade, we've gone from a debt to GDP ratio of 17%, 18%, to a debt to GDP ratio that is now over 100%. That's why around 2019 you saw that this is where the problem started. So the moment, and this happens to anybody, if you owe more money than you make in a year, no bank will lend you money as a person. In fact, that's just a key financial tip for anybody. So we'll say that even for government. If you owe more money than your whole economy makes, then nobody would want to lend you money, because then your ability to repay becomes constrained. It becomes a problem. So that, I think, is the biggest movement. Then what caused that explosion was the movement of both internal and external debt. Back in 2010, we were majority internal debt. It was about 10 million, it was about 10 billion kwacha internal debt, 7 billion kwacha external debt. So then external debt moves from just under $2 billion, back then that was about 7 billion kwacha, now to about 5 billion when President Sata passed away. Then it's exploded up to about 13 billion, and that's the external debt we know. Well, we pray that the Chinese debt that's added in there is not a bit more. And then there's the internal debt explosion that happened over the last 2 years because the global doors closed for President Lungu. They decided to lend out of control for the last, I think 60% of the debt of this country was contracted over the last 2 years, local debt. And we'll get to that. But effectively, over the last 5 years alone, under President Lungu's regime, debt has grown by 300 billion kwacha. Okay, out of the 380 billion or almost 400 billion, debt has grown by 300 billion kwacha under President Lungu's regime. Okay, and about now that. Most people say, well, that's infrastructure. He did that and it was exchange rate. Well, from my analysis, what I found was about only 72 billion of that went to infrastructure, and only about 65 billion of that was the exchange rate. Where's the other 167 billion? So these are the problems of it's reckless spending. So that's why I'm saying there's the example of reckless spending. Now look at the internal debt. The moment the global doors close down, the government decides they want to lend all sorts of ways. Under President Lungu's regime, again, the debt grows from 24 billion kwacha to 180. Now this isn't some sort of political breakdown. This is just under his 5 years. So this is what has to be redeemed, because a country cannot go from owing 24 billion in domestic debt to owing 180 billion, and you can continue business as usual. So where's the source of this coming? The budget overruns. Budget overruns have gone from just about 10% back in 2010, and that was already a problem. Because under President Mwanawasa, there were 3 budgets he knocked out where he had surpluses. Okay, then you got budget overruns that start in this session. Now we have to be able to say. And the budget overruns, I think it was last year, they got up to about 70-80%. So imagine, Yoela, let me put this for a household. Imagine you earn 10,000 kwacha a month, but you're spending 18,000. Exactly how long do you think before someone comes and liquidates you as a person?
Not long.
So this is what we were in. So the first thing we have to do is we have to go through a spending detox. Dave Ramsey says it this way. He says the best way to get out of debt is to first stop contracting it. So in other words, live within your means. Our government has to learn to live within its means, because from this last regime, we started with budget overruns of 50%, and we normalized 50%, spending 50% more than we make in revenue. We normalized this, and it was just getting higher and higher and higher. So we were never balancing. And I say to anybody, if you spend more than you make, you're going to go into bankruptcy. And it's just governments cannot do that. Effectively, a change of government has happened. Now we must see a change of attitude and a change of direction. So this budget has to signal the deficit. That's the key thing everyone has to watch out for. Because you as an individual, you think you're not affected by the deficit. Everyone watches pay as you earn and those things. Because they're looking at their tax. Let me explain why your deficits are going to hit you the worst. And I know we've gone really strong into this, but for those who look at banking, everybody has been asking a question: why has it been so difficult to lend to borrow money from a bank? Because banks, when government is borrowing too much, the banks take the savings of the people, and banks right now are oversupplied with savings. There's too much cash sitting in banks. So what they do is they take that cash and they push it towards government debt instruments, and all the institutions do that as well. So the banks have gone from making only about 10% of their money, or about 15% of their money, from lending to individuals. From lending to government.
They've shifted to government.
37% of their revenue now is coming from government. In fact, they're making more money lending to the government than they are to people. So therefore, over the last 5 years, SME loans have been stunted. They've actually declined in composition. And the top 3% of lenders, which are big business and government, are taking up over 90% of all the loans issued out. So this is where the problem comes. So if the government can rein in the deficits, then we can get interest rates coming down. Then that home home you want to build starts to improve. That car you're trying to buy, the debt, the cost on that starts to come down. That business capital you're trying to get. Maybe if you're a small business, you want to expand, you want to get some inventory. That inventory you want to buy comes at a lower interest rate. So if you want to do any transactions as an individual or as a small business, you need the government to rein in its deficit so that you can access credit.
And this speaks to, with the formation of the Ministry of SMEs, this is that language, if they adopt that, it will speak to the fact that the new SME ministry introduced. Those are things that they'll feed into, cheaper rates from banks so that, startups or even small businesses can actually access financing at much cheaper rates, isn't it?
The key, Yoela, the key for getting a bank to lend, the key for getting banks to lend to small businesses is this: let the banks run out of big businesses to lend to, because they will always lend to big businesses first, and then make the government rates so cheap that the banks are forced to make their spread. Because a bank does this: I get my money at 9, I lend money 9%. I get money 9% from the savers. Okay, 10%. So then I push that onto the lending markets. First person I go to, government. Okay,
1%.
If the government is too low, if the government is now giving me rates of 15, 16%, I don't want to start lending to the government. I want to start going to the private sector. Then I have to go to the big businesses. The big businesses are going to push for low rates. Then if I really want to make a good spread, I then have to go to the small businesses. So you need government credit. You need government credit to be undersupplied and over demand. You need excess demand on government credit, on government instruments, and low supply. You only get low supply when you have low deficits. High deficits, you get high supply. Interesting.
Now, you spoke of debt and the fact that we've been in this scenario for some time now. This year's budget that was presented last year, 40% of it was for debt servicing. Do you see the same type of figures with the 2022 budget as the minister presented on this Friday?
Well, remember, about two-thirds, as I said, two-thirds of the debt itself is it's foreign debt. So because the exchange rate has come down a little bit, that foreign debt can now be curtailed a little bit. So it's maybe down about 30% in value and 30% in interest payments. So we can try and work off that. But remember, they have to work with estimations of what the exchange rate is going to look like. If the Zambian people can for once learn to be loyal to their products and possibly buy local products and then spend as much as we can locally, we can maintain this exchange rate as it is, or at least push it down a bit more, because our behavior as people, because you can say the government exchange rate, but in your house as a person, where's your food coming from? Look at your products that you're buying. If you're brand specific, well, then you are the problem to this economy, and then you're going to make their life difficult when paying their debts. So let's see if we can rein that in. If we can rein in even our importing behavior, and they can rein in the exchange rate, then we can look at that. But also, the global investors who are coming into the debt markets are looking at a way to place money. So you have a Federal Reserve still in America pushing interest rates down. And they're saying they're not ready to jump in the market and push rates up. No, there's rate hike talks, but it's tentative rate hike talks. It's not very strong ones. And also, news just came in recently that China's economy is not doing too well. The growth rates are going to drop to about 4.9% expected in Q3. So because of that 4.9 growth rate, you're expecting that everyone else is not ready to start hiking interest rates. China is definitely not going to be hiking interest rates. So the key I think everyone wants to start playing around with is, because you've got a strongly monetary stimulus environment, then you're probably going to see a lot of global investors still being able to come in and play our debt markets. Because if I can get money from the Federal Reserve, if I'm a trader, and I can get money from the Federal Reserve at 1%, if I'm JP Morgan, for example, I get money at 1% from my Federal Reserve, and then you've got Zambia here offering me 15% on their bonds at a stable interest rate. Well, this is pretty much the easiest game in town. I take 1% of free money and then I give it to the Zambians at 9%, and I'm making 8% for nothing. That's what the global investors get to play with, and that can suppress your exchange rates a little bit. If we can keep that under control, then it keeps a lot of our economy under control. But the reality, Yoela, is there needs to be growth. If there's no growth, this is not sustainable.
Another angle I want us to touch on civil service pay. I know most of them are grappling with debt swap. I know they are overly borrowed. Do you see government making adjustments towards pay to just cushion the effects of how much they've overborrowed, or you don't see that changing? How do you see the budget touching the issue of civil service pay?
Well, I think the issue of, first of all, the way they've been with the debt swap, you can see they're very hesitant to try and accommodate it. So and we are in agreement with this. A lot of us in the private sector are in agreement with this. The government cannot take on other people's debt. It's barely managing its own.
Yeah.
How can it take on its civil servants' debt? That's what the debt swap is basically doing to it. And then two, the biggest problem in Zambia, let's also now start to address civil service pay grades.
Yeah.
The civil servants are the highest paid people in this country next to NGO workers. Why are, and I'm sorry to say it this way, in fact, I'm not even sorry, I'm going to say it openly. Why are the most unproductive people the highest paid in this country? Because these are unproductive sectors of the economy. They're not profit, they're not people that grow. 60% of the jobs in this country, in fact, 67% of the jobs in this country are supposed to go to the private sector. You do not have a proper country where your highest paid people are in your unproductive sectors. You know what you're doing? A person's aspirations in Zambia are to work for government. So that means your most talented people are taking their best talent to the least productive institution in the country. Yes, it's an administrative institution, but it's not a productive institution.
Yeah.
So if we can, civil service pay must be frozen until the private sector pay outpaces it, and it must be pegged. Never again should we allow civil service pay to outpace private sector pay, because then you're taking someone out of a bank or out of a private sector institution where there's growth and job creation into an administrative position. So if you've got employees, somebody will leave a bank to go and work for the central bank, for example. The central bank doesn't make money. Okay, the central bank is the administrator and the regulator.
Yeah.
So the banks, you need them to grow. So you need the talented people in the banks, for example. You need talented people in the industries, but you can't do that if the highest salaries in the country are sitting in the civil service. So they have to freeze those people's pay. Tough luck. The rest of us have had to live under those circumstances. Join us for once.
Yeah, I don't think that would be a very popular move. I'm sure you know that politically, but we'll see what the minister says. Now, what about general business and consumer incentives? What are your expectations, or what would you like to see the minister present with regards to the business and general consumers?
Well, I think the general consumers, they did actually touch on this. And I think as Anthony Wale went through this when he said that there is a plan to knock down the tax rate for the consumers by about 40% over a period of time. That may be the cushioning they may try and help the civil servants with. You want to try and knock that down over a period of time, basically bringing it down. If you're earning about 10,000, I think I did the math, where it can actually open up another 160 to 200 kwacha a month every single year. If they continue to do that, and over a period of time, it'll actually open it up. If you're earning 40,000, for example, it'll bring up an extra 1,000 kwacha. So this is needed, because if you go back to 2012 and you go back to the budget where they actually had this, you found that unemployment started to go up. Unemployment started to rise when they started to tax the higher part of the economy. Tax the rich brought in more unemployment as a country. And I think that's where it started to backfire. And then you had your unemployed youth who really, really now got upset as a country. And you've had wage stagnation. So the other thing you need to remember, Yoela, is that real wages in this country have not grown for the last decade. And I'm talking about when you factor in inflation, real wages have stayed flat for the last, I think, since if you go back to 2010, 2012, real wages were about 8 kwacha 60 per hour. In terms of how much a person earns per hour worked, and now they're about 9 kwacha 60. So we're really looking at just a 10% growth of real wages over the last decade, which is really slow for a group of people. So I think what we're going to need is to ease that up. But for small businesses, there is a promise that the UPND made that they're going to have to stick to, where they did say that they're going to try and see if they can freeze levies and taxes on your first year of doing business, 0, then only 25% liability,
and then,
gradually into your
gradually
5th year.
Increase up to the 5th year.
I think we need to be talking about that. That needs to come in now, because small businesses have been asking for a better ICT and business advisory infrastructure. They've been asking for less regulation. We did a survey of them, and then the third request they asked was for tax incentives. And I think what we need to start talking about as a country is moving turnover tax, that 4% that we only charge, move that from 800,000 kwacha to 10 million kwacha. It's been sitting there for how long? So let that move gradually, even by 1 million a year, so that small businesses have this room to grow, and let's turn the 10 million kwacha into the benchmark for somebody who's now out of SME, rather than holding that 800,000 kwacha. It's not much. So if we can look at those incentives, because we need to push growth. And if you can push your SMEs to growth and your households to consumption and to now ring fence it into localized spending, those three things will actually help the economy grow fast enough to collect enough taxes. And I think we also need to get away from that ideology as a country that higher taxes equal higher revenue. I think the government has learned its lesson that higher taxes have not, but lower taxes, let me just give you a simple example. If ShopRite drops the price of things or a store drops the price of things, don't you see queues of people running into those shops?
Of course.
Exactly. That's why people run in for specials. Drop the taxes, you'll see people paying them more. More people who are off the records start coming on the records.
Interesting. Now, another industry that is interested in this budget is the mining industry. There's been talk left, right, and center, back and forth with regards to tax regime for the mines. What are your expectations? What should happen towards the mines to show, to at least see some growth out of there?
The mines are the most interesting group of people because while being the most pivotal part of our economy, they're the single most unpopular group because they always feel like they're the golden child treated well while we are that last child who no one cares about. The people think the mines are like the last born of the family, while we're the firstborn who are left to eat on plastic plates and bowls. Here's what you do to try and fix the mines. I think the mines should get a tax cut. I know that's an unpopular view, but I think it should be coupled with conditions. I think we should be even talking about dropping mineral royalties. It's no problem dropping mineral royalties again and dropping the effective tax. That's not a problem. But we need to be talking about localized ownership. We need to be talking about we need to be talking about mining that can bank in Zambia. No more of this banking your money in Switzerland. Bank the money here, and we can talk about a better tax regime. We need to be talking about allowing people to enter the mining industry. If I'm allowed to enter the mining industry, I'm no longer envious of them, but now I can compete with them. Now I know we need to find a way to get our artisanal miners, the way Congo has done it. Congo has organized its artisanal miners for cobalt so that they can actually participate stronger in the export of cobalt. Let's get artisanal miners to stop running over black mountains and to actually become more organized and actually get them to actually participate. We need a way to get our artisanal miners also on the exchange. I will say this to the Chamber of Mines and to the mines themselves. If you want peace to mine for the next 20 years without disruption, you need the Zambians in there. Because if you are the only one profiting from mining, these people will turn on you at the next elections or an election after that because they feel that it's an unequal playing field. So what you want to Zambians to rather than making us activists where we're campaigning and shouting at you, let us compete with you. There's enough copper to go around. There's enough demand. Remember that over the next 30 years, there's about 30 million more tons of copper that's going to be on demand, and there's only 15 million more of supply that can come in. We already got a copper shortage. Why should we be fighting as if we shouldn't get into the game as well? So let the Zambian people get in, but then the mines need to also play a more active role in society. Mines should be funding college sponsorships. 1% of mining revenue should be going to sending children to college. 0.25% of mining revenue should be going to buying ZeduPads for our children to help our teachers. Mines should be building out better hospitals, better schools, continue building the city.
They should show in their
social responsibility. But here's where it comes down, Yuela. 50% of mining contracts should go to youth enterprises. That is the way that you get young entrepreneurs off the back of the politicians. Because now if mines are saying we're issuing out 50% of all of our tenders to local youth enterprises, you will see young people now actually getting into the business game better than sitting on the road becoming activists, and there's business opportunities open to them, and no more of this thing of sending business opportunities to external parties. Mines need to look for local suppliers as much as possible to do a lot of the work that they need here as well. If they can do that and they can support a lot of industries, support a lot of work, bank locally, if the mines have a local footprint, profiting off this doesn't become a problem, and they allow us to compete, then having a lower tax regime for mines isn't the worst thing in the world. But the key, if you want young people to want the mines here, especially the foreign ones, those foreign-owned ones, if you want young people to support your existence, give them contracts. If you demarcate 50% of your contracts to young entrepreneurs, then I can guarantee you that those young entrepreneurs will defend your existence because you are their source of bread. But if you are not their source of bread and they are watching you eat cake while they are starving to find water, they will ask for you out and will have the last 10 years on repeat again.
Interesting. Now let's quickly move to budget and economic decentralization. How would you want the budget and the economy to be decentralized?
Here's the first statistic that everyone needs to know, Yola. 55% of jobs in this country are found in Lusaka and Copperbelt. 2 provinces are holding 55% of the economic opportunities for their people. What's the one reason people migrate the most in the world? Economic opportunity. We're still having that move where somebody maybe will leave Chipata, for example, and come down to Lusaka. Barely any of us here even from Lusaka. Hardly any of us were even raised here. But we're still migrating here for economic opportunities.
Yeah.
Young people are still arriving on the corners of Lusaka and Copperbelt looking for economic opportunities because 55% of all jobs, whether formal or informal, are here. Because too many of the formal jobs are here. Think about it. All the mechanics, where can they work? Lusaka and Copperbelt.
Yeah.
So we've got all these mechanics here, repairmen, people who work in yards, people who are builders, all these people, where are they? They are found here because all the contracts are here. The money is centralized here. The money is controlled here. Everything is here.
Yeah.
So because all the opportunities are sitting here in this little pocket of this country, that means almost a third of the country's adult workforce is found here. But still, that's too many jobs. It's an over concentration of jobs in such a small landmass. So if you decentralize the economy and you start telling all the local governments it's time to take care of yourselves, you guys can now start to collect your own taxes. You guys can start to collect your own, to offer your own services.
Yeah.
We will no longer overstep you. The Minister Gary Nkombo is a very important piece of this puzzle. If he executes decentralization, he can actually save Zambia. And that's why there's a lot riding on his shoulders right now. And also now with this budget. So to actually sit down with the district levels and the provincial levels to start saying, manage yourselves, raise your own taxes, build your own schools. You know, the first thing that a district now starts to think when it says, okay, I'm not getting money from the central government that much. Now I have to raise money here. You know what the first thing is going to happen? I need to figure out how to attract businesses here. So the first thing you're going to find from every single group is they're going to start looking at how to attract businesses. What economic opportunities do I have here? How do I get young people to set up farms here? How do I get businesses here? How do I get innovations here? When you have 105 districts all asking that question, then you have what you call geographic competition. Everyone is competing to get as many people from Zambia in their province.
But how does a budget address that?
Because what it does is then it gives taxing powers to those districts. You can actually, and then it starts to give them a lot more leeway. It should give them a bit of support, but we need to make sure that the budget no longer babies the districts. The budget has to step back and say, we will no longer take care of district affairs. If there's a pothole on your street, that's your city council to fix. That is not the central government of Zambia's work to fix. Cut that out of the budget, stick to interstate highways, inter-provincial and inter-district business, and allow autonomy of districts and provinces. And I can guarantee you that we have a decentralized economy. And once we decentralize, we will learn that we will stop having to gather peanuts from Chipata, or groundnuts from Chipata, bring them to Lusaka to process peanut butter, and then start sending it around the country. Rather, peanut butter factories will be sent to the eastern province where the peanuts are grown themselves. And that's how we start to decentralize the economy, because once a peanut butter factory is set up there, well, then there's workers, schools, all these things. Let's also look at the education sector. Why are so many colleges in Zambia in Lusaka? Why are so many of them in Lusaka and Copperbelt when we should be having college towns? Why aren't we incentivizing people? Tax incentives need to be offered to some of these universities to go out there. If you have 1,000 students plus, take your 1,000 students into a boarding facility outside. We'll give you three years zero tax. That's what we need to offer them. 3 years zero tax as a university. Go there, set up, and get yourself set up and move all your students and teachers there. If I'm a university, you know that's much better for me, because if I can get my teachers and lecturers out of Lusaka, that means I can pay them 6,000 kwacha. I don't have to pay. If I pay them 6,000 kwacha here in Lusaka, half of that money goes to rent. If I take it to Mukushi and I pay you 6,000 kwacha, you pay like 1,000 kwacha in rent.
Yeah.
That's a much better deal for me to conduct business. But what's the incentive? You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Packaging tax incentives for decentralization while offering incentives for the districts to actually start moving around. That will actually save this country and move a lot more people away from just living in two areas. And let's be honest, in about 3 or 4 districts, half of this country's jobs are found.
Yeah, interesting. Now, having said all that, Mnyumba, where do you anticipate the government plans to get its revenue for the 2020 international budget?
Look,
looking at where we are as a country, we're still looking for an IMF bailout package. So many issues that, basically, as the president said when he came into power, the treasury is empty.
Freeze the deficits. As I said, first thing you got to do whenever you're in a state of economic anomie, and I'm gonna borrow a word from the honourable minister also the honourable member of parliament in Nigeria, Patrick Obahiobo. When you find yourself in a state of the Makaba dance, oh yes, and you find yourself lugubrious and sardonic, you have to stop the borrowing. Stop the bleeding. It's the same thing you do to a patient who's been shot. Yeah. Stop the bleeding so that you can fix the problem. But the bleeding is the deficits. What this country needs to do, and I keep pounding on this, we need to put it in the Constitution. Debt ceilings don't work. A debt ceiling is a goal. The problem is the habit that gets us to that goal. That's why we keep moving these debt ceilings. So remove the habit. No president should ever be constitutionally allowed, because the Constitution is that only power that can check a president very easily. No president should be constitutionally allowed to run a budget in excess of their taxes unless we're in an economic recession. And over the period, they have to balance it out. They have to do that. If we can do that, then we can actually go and use that as a bargaining chip to the IMF, but for the purpose of making sure we wring this problem out once and for all. But the other thing that needs to happen is you need to unleash the entrepreneurs. The government is only going to get money when people are starting businesses. Yeah. But the problem is that civil servants are sitting there blocking businesses, and there's also a lot of misunderstanding. Let's get the businesses out. That's where the government will get a lot of its money. Yeah. We need to get as much business activity running through this place, and we need to get as much business optimism. Once there's optimism, Yoela, all of a sudden a lot of the economy starts to grow. That's what we need. We need an optimism outlook, and we need opportunities for people. But I'm going to take the emphasis off the government for a second. It boils down to society. Yeah. If we don't meet the targets ourselves, I don't understand where people expect an economy to grow if you are not growing your money. You are sitting there on the same salary with no plan to grow your salary. You've got no hustle going on, but then you're saying Zambia must grow. But where do you expect the growth to come from? Zambia is nothing but a collection of Zambians. So the Zambian people and the social leaders, those who have ideas, those who are able to unite people, those who are spheres of influence, who have the sphere of influence of culture, we need to start speaking to each other in a more entrepreneurial fashion. We need to stop acting like beggars as people, because Yoela, on that revenue side of the problem with the Zambian people is we feature on the expenditure side of the budget. Yeah. But we don't feature on the revenue side. As people, we must be more on the revenue side of the budget than on the expenditure side. But that's a mindset thing. The people have to shift their mindset to make this budget work. Because we can't just go to the president and say, no, make it happen for us. No, we have to make it happen. And if he says, I want to grow the economy by 10%, I'm going home and saying I'm growing my revenue by 30%. That's the conversation we need to start having.
Interesting. Just as we are winding up, which of the sectors do you feel feasibly allowed to have an increase in budget allocation? There's been talk about health, agriculture, but mostly health. And now that the government plans to have free education, obviously over time, what are your expectations in terms of allocation of budget to these sectors, health, education, and agriculture?
I think what they're trying to do is they're just trying to reorganize money to go to those places. Remember, a lot of money was going to infrastructure and debt servicing. Yeah. So with that freed up money, maybe it can go to some of those areas to improve the allocations to there. We do need better health as a country, but I'm worried about trying to make everything free. I think that's the one promise I'm worried about the most, making everything free. I think we need to make things quality, affordable, and as accessible as possible to people. But I think for now, what we just need to focus on is stabilizing our government spending. If we don't stabilize the government spending, nothing will be able to get any allocation. Remember that President Chilema started his very famous speech with, I have to do part 2A, 2B. I cannot do part 2B where I'm spending on people before I do part 2A.
Exactly.
So before we start talking about budget allocations, let's talk about revenue generation. There's no spending without sales. Just like I run a business, Yoela. A lot of people run businesses here. If you have no sales department, no active sales department, you're running a charity. And this is not a charity, this is a country.
Yeah. In closing, Dr. Msokotwane has a number of deliverables from the way you sound. Can you tell me the biggest deliverables that the doc has? Looking at his past experience in the MMD government before we came into PF.
There are two things Dr. Msokotwane has to balance. One is he has to relive his old days of bringing back stability. That's what he has to do. He has to bring sanity to spending, and he has to decentralize. Those are the main things, decentralization and sanity. But in terms of the issuing of a progressive budget, the president did say he has a progressive budget. That's one of the things that stood out. In order for him to deliver a progressive budget, Dr. Msokotwane has to avoid the ills of what happened in the MMD government, where the economy grew by 4x, effectively, not the real economy, just the nominal economy, grew by 4 times, but Zambian people still remain 90% poor. President Mwanawasa is quoted as once saying, "For all the economic growth I brought to Zambia, my biggest failure is that poverty still remained." He must avoid that we get an exclusionary budget and exclusionary this. And everybody's worried that the conversation has always been investor this, investor that, investor this. Here's what I say to the people. I took that personally as well as a person. I felt disheartened whenever I kept on hearing investor this, investor that. But then I came to the realization that as the local entrepreneurs, we haven't proved ourselves yet. Okay? In as much as we want to run this country, we're only going to be given we're only going to be given the props and respect when we actually step up and run this country. And nobody's going to roll out a red carpet for us. So I think I can't put that on Dr. Msokotwane more than I would ask him this. Just look at the tax regime, make it a bit friendlier to the people, and then look at the government regulations and the levies. Let's not make too much money off the regulation, licensing fees and levies, but let's focus on actually trying to give the people an opportunity to run. But it's up to us as the people to go in there, create businesses. Let's flood this market with businesses. Let's make noise. Let's make him see us. That's a message I'll send to the business people. Let's make them hear us. Okay? Once they hear us, then they'll have no choice but to take us seriously. But don't ask to be taken seriously when you're not serious. Get serious and people will take you seriously.
Well, thank you so much, Myumba, for coming through and giving us that breakdown of the upcoming budget.
Thank you very much.
All right, so that is Myumba Mtwale, an economist and financial markets advisor, breaking it down on expectations of the budget. The budget, of course, will be presented this Friday by Dr. Situmbeko Msokotwane. Last year's presentation for 2021 was 119.6 billion kwacha. We don't know what it's going to come to this time around, but it's got all his hands full and everybody's expectant. But guess what? On Friday itself, when the budget is presented in the afternoon, we'll do a pre-budget analysis with the guests, and then we'll have a live crossover to Parliament. And then after that, of course, we have a post-budget analysis, so be sure to tune in. But for now, thank you so much for watching. My name is Yoela Chamba. See you next week.